Well, I have no new episode of the Knick to talk about, considering there was no new episode, so I figure I might as well make do by talking about last week's episode, which I missed. Now, this episode, while not quite as strong as the first two, still maintained the usual high standards, I think. It still tackles these very sophisticated medical issues with a great deal of maturity, and Steven Soderbergh sure still knows how to direct these scenes. He knows how to direct his actors. I can't really think of much of a dull moment in the episode. Really, the only moment in this particular episode that I felt was kind of not quite as solid as the rest was the baby, finding the baby on the front porch. I'm not really sure how that tied into anything else. Maybe it could tie into the theme of this episode, which was, a small chance at life is better than no chance at all. Something like that. So maybe that's what they were going for with leaving the baby at the Knickerbocker, but narratively, I don't really know how that's going to tie into anything. But this episode not only introduced an old flame of Dr. Thackeray's, and I believe Jennifer Farren was the woman. She came in, presumably after just kicked her husband to the curb for giving her syphilis. Now, how extreme is her case of syphilis? Well, I'm glad you asked. As it so happens, her nose is gone. Yeah, there are these two gaping holes where her nose used to be. So yeah, syphilis will do that in the year 1900. Now it's not that she herself or Dr. Thackeray, for that matter, were not monogamous. It's just that her husband, or now ex-husband, presumably, was fooling around with this one chick who had previously fooled around with a lot of other men. So that's how she eventually came to get it. Now, I believe the term she used was syphilitic whore, which, that sounds about accurate given her take on the story. But seeing as she insists Dr. Thackeray be the one to perform the nasal reconstruction surgery, that'll make next week's episode pretty interesting. And that's not the only thing that they set up for next time. They also have Birdie and Gallinger trying to decipher how to do a particular surgery, or how to do a particular surgical procedure, and they're kind of reading this paper published in a French magazine, except they don't know how to read it. And it turns out the author of this particular piece and the guy with the necessary knowledge is Dr. Edwards, the black guy on the block. So even Dr. Thackeray, who has disliked the idea of Dr. Edwards being around from the very beginning, admits without any kind of hesitation that, yeah, we need him. Not too involved. I mean, he's not going to touch the patient. He's not going to actually get too involved with the procedure. He's just going to talk Gallinger through it. Whether or not he will get his hands dirtier than that remains to be seen. But that was pretty interesting. And speaking of Dr. Edwards, we really saw him, I don't want to say come into his own, because this does not exactly end well for him, but we really saw him start to develop a little bit more individuality from the other doctors, and his method of doing that was to start an African American wing of the hospital in the basement in his own office, or what you could very loosely call an office. I mean, he has the laundress employed, or partially employed, as the woman who sews up the wounds. And as uninitiated audience members, you're thinking, well, this could make for some potentially interesting storylines down the season. But no, after one episode, it all goes downhill because he loses one of his patients. Not really because of anything he did, it's just because the patient himself did not follow doctor's orders. So after that, Edwards was unable to save him. So So I think what this show really has really done well thus far is deal with the very real possibility, granted a pessimistic possibility, but the very real possibility of of patients, a number of patients not necessarily making it through a given procedure. I mean, as grim and gruesome as it sounds, a lot of them really don't make it, especially given this very this setting that is very primitive by today's standards. And the fact that they are portraying that fairly consistently, I thought is actually pretty interesting. Now, somewhat less interesting, I say somewhat because this is not entirely devoid of interest. Somewhat less interesting is Dr. Thackeray coming to terms with the theme of this episode, which, as I said, is, a little bit of a chance is better than nothing. And this point is really hammered home by his communications with Lucy, the nurse. So using this newfound confidence in his own abilities and the possibility of life, he performs a very dangerous operation on a little girl and saves her life. Now, in addition to that, we also have a potential seasonal arc in this supposed typhoid epidemic that's going on, or it could sprout into an epidemic. Typhoid, as we know, is a pretty dangerous disease, and in this setting, where again the medical procedures are very primitive and almost caveman-like by today's standards, it could be especially bad, even more so in light of all of the unfortunate circumstances that the Knickerbocker has had to go through in these 3 episodes. And speaking of that, Barrow, he finally settles his debt, and we also learn possibly why he was in debt in the first place. I mean, he could have been taking money out of the hospital and putting it towards his own sexual satisfaction. Hence the title of the episode, The Busy Flea, which, by the way, I want to know, this could be just my sick curiosity coming through, but I want to know if that was an actual game of foreplay. I want to know if someone in the early 1900s really asked for the busy flea. Is that even a real thing? Moreover, why am I still talking about it? It was just such an odd little moment. But then again, the one performing it was the one getting paid, so I guess it really didn't have to make sense as long as Barrow paid up. But yeah, overall this episode was pretty good. Again, not quite as strong as the first 2. I think the freshness of the first 2 episodes is really what makes them a little bit better than this one. This one, I don't want to say the show is becoming serialized or getting less interesting, because it's not at all. But again, it's just that freshness is just starting to subside, and I don't really know how much of that I can blame on this episode. But yeah, as always, I'm looking forward to the next one, and sorry I was a week late getting this to you, but honestly, I don't really know how many people watch these vlogs anyway. It's just to get my thoughts down and to see if anyone can shed some new light on the subjects that I'm talking about. So the Knick, please continue watching it, and let's see if we can get a 3rd season out of it, because it was already renewed for a 2nd season. Let's get a 3rd.